Welcome to the shop. I'm Jared and this is the Questionable Garage, and today we're talking engine swaps. You've been considering doing a V8 swap to whatever you're driving, and well, I've got a lot of experience with swapping the three big modern V8s into a car. So we're gonna talk about it today. I wanna try to help educate you a little bit of the history of each of the big three's popular V8s that are used in engine swaps, some of the pros and some of the cons of each one, and I'll let you know which one I liked best. Spoiler, it's not the one in the car right now. Now, if the voice sounds a little bit off as we are going through all of this, and you may say, Jared, why aren't you working on cars? Well, I had surgery recently. It was actually a surgery I had been needing for quite a while that I kept putting off so we could finish up the Triple Crown first. So we are doing well on the recovery side of things. It's just a lot of weird voices and sounds and fluids still coming out, but we're doing good there. But I'm actually really looking forward to this episode because in the comment sections, a lot of times you guys kind of ask, what engine should you swap into your car? And we're gonna be able to go over just a little bit of all of it. There are three go-to engines when it comes to the swaps. The LS, the Gen III Hemi, the Coyote. Today's sponsor, Factor. That's right, Factor is back once again, and it's gotta be one of my favorite ad reads because, well, it means I'm eating really good for lunch here in the shop. Now, if you're not familiar with what Factor is a meal delivery service that makes meeting your nutrition goals easier than ever by delivering fresh, never frozen, ready to heat and eat meals right to your doorstep. With a wife who works a full-time job and me that works an absolute crazy schedule around the shop and sometimes on the road, getting good quality meals is sometimes difficult, and we end up relying on meal order delivery services way too much. And when you take the time to factor in just how much you're spending on fast food dropped off to your doorstep, you'd be amazed at the quality of food you can get in your fridge for less money. And when I say they are easy to prepare, I'm not kidding. The hardest part is picking which one you want to eat. Pull them out of the fridge, stab a couple holes, throw it in the microwave for 2 minutes. Unless you get the gourmet options, they have a couple extra special instructions, but let it go for 2 minutes, put it on the plate, and enjoy. And what's great about Factor is they have meal plans that will work with your dietary restrictions. Keto, Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, whatever you need, they've got it for you. Plus, along with their meals, they have tons of add-ins. You can get some desserts, you can get some snacks, you can get some of their cold pressed juices. I'm really excited to have my apple beet here as soon as we're done talking. They've got everything you need to make sure you are full and happy whenever you sit down and eat. Plus, the menu is updated all the time by their gourmet chefs, and you get fun seasonal favorites like apple Dijon pork chops and cranberry pecan chicken. Now, if you're ready to make less questionable choices in your meal planning, head on over to Factor75 or click that link in the description box below. Use code questionable50 and you're gonna save 50% off your first meal box. Again, head on over to Factor75.com, click that link in the description box below, enter code questionable50, save 50% off your first meal box. What are you waiting for? I absolutely love it. They're a hit every time I have them in the shop. It's easier to get help in here because they're gonna get really good food. You can get really good food at home too now. Save 50%. Link down below. Questionable 50, save that 50%. Now, before we get too much into the specifics of what it takes to swap each of these engines, because again, I've done all three in one car, let's talk about some of the history and how they all came to be. The LS came into the world in 1997. First debuted in the Corvette as a 5.7 liter all aluminum V8 engine. It was an answer to the demands of needing to have a cleaner running, more efficient engine to meet emission standards, as well as the general public of wanting more horsepower with better efficiency. And while a lot of the basic structure is somewhat similar to the older small blocks, there's really nothing interchangeable from an old small block into any of the LS or Vortec family engines, aside from the bell housing bolt pattern, except for one, the LS4, which will only bolt to a 4T6L, you know, the 4L60E, 4T60E. There you go, the transverse engine in the Malibus and other V8 front-wheel drive cars. That is its kind of own little thing. The LS4, good for you Fiero swap guys, things like that. But if you're shopping for a swap, do not buy an LS4 thinking you can put it in a rear-wheel drive car. You're gonna have a bad time. Pretty much everything else under the umbrella works. In 1998, you started to see the LS1 in the Camaro as well, and it just grew from there. You got 6.2 variants, the LS3 variant, you've got the LSA variants with superchargers. It went crazy, and you've also then got the Vortec truck engines, which are basically iron block LSs. There are some small differences, but for our performance applications and swapping applications, they're effectively the same engine. Now, one other reason we're gonna say these things are so incredibly popular for swaps is just of the LS families, the aluminum families, there's estimated to be 100 million of these engines made. So when you have lots and lots of them, they become affordable. And that is also why the small block back in the day was such a popular engine for swapping. There were just so stinking many of them. You can put them in just about everything. Another big part of what lends an LS to being a very swappable engine is its small size. It is a traditional cam in block design, meaning it has push rods that goes up to your rockers and valves above the camshaft. By doing that, you're able to have smaller cylinder heads and a much more compact platform. You can see exactly how narrow this engine is, and we can look at the picture of it in the engine bay, how much room is around this engine in the engine bay. Because its relative small size and capability to produce absolute mammoth amounts of horsepower, it's a pretty solid choice. But we got two more engines to talk about. Let's go over to our friend, the Gen 3 Hemi. Hey, that thing got a Hemi? I'm sure most of you, well, I hope most of you, some of you may be too young, to remember in the early 2000s the return of that catchphrase.
Hey, that thing got a Hemi? Yeah. Sweet.
The king of muscle cars back in the day was the Mopar Hemi engine. It revolutionized engine design with the hemispherical cylinder head. By its design, it quickly became the king of cylinder head flow, and it left the other two manufacturers playing catch-up. Well, that engine design and engine name, I believe, left around early 70s. The Hemi name went away along with its design and marketing, and let's just say Dodge, it kind of went through a dark period. You know, you have the beauties of our 70 Duster, the 70 Roadrunner, the 70 Charger, you know, then they lost their way. You know, the 80s Charger, they had some dark times, but genius of marketing and, well, just good engine design. Around 2003, we saw the return of the Gen 3 Hemi in the Ram pickup trucks. Looking to expand and improve the Magnum V8 that they were running through the 90s, they were looking for something to improve emissions and power. It's funny how often improving emissions results in horsepower. Because again, at the end of the day, the most powerful combustion is generally the most efficient combustion. Us, you know, race car builders like our cars to run well and actually tend not produce that much tailpipe emissions. We're chasing the wrong people. Go after the guys rolling coal, not us E85 tuners. But at any rate, I digress. 2003 saw the return of the Hemi and those classic commercials coming back of people rolling up next to Ram pickup trucks and asking, hey, that thing got a Hemi. And it performed incredibly well. Then 2009, something happened. And this is my personal preference. If you're swapping a Gen 3 and you're doing a 5.7, it needs to be a 2009 or newer. Hands down. 2009, variable timing was introduced. That was an okay change. The biggest change were the Eagle cylinder heads that they launched on the 2009 and newer 5.7s. When it comes to cylinder head flow, there are few factory cylinder heads that can compete with the Eagle Hemis. Now this is the 6.1 Hemi in theory. If you've watched the series, you know this was a junkyard surprise 7-liter fully forged stroker. We're going to talk about this being a 6.1. Some of the biggest differences in a 6.1 versus the 5.7s or the 6.2s and 6.4s, these did not get variable timing and they have their own cylinder head, which actually is a very good flowing head comparable to the Eagles. Another thing is, I believe pretty much all of the 6.1s, 6.2s, and 6.4 engines got a forged crankshaft, where the previous ones got a nodular iron, which is good to about 700 horsepower or so. The 6.1s are known to have slightly soft connecting rods that if you wanted to go crazy boost, you're sometimes better starting with a 5.7 unless you wanted to do some building like this one. Overall, it's just a really good solid package. There's several different variants of it. Of course, the Hellcat, the Elephant. So it goes to show how absolutely incredible an engine this is. Now, one thing I do want to touch on, unlike the LS, which is an aluminum engine, and then there's of course the iron variants, you only have an option of an iron block in a Gen 3 Hemi, which sets you back 140 to 200 pounds more than an LS. You will likely feel that weight of the engine on the nose of the car. I did driving the Duster, but to me, it's a sacrifice that's worth making. Well, that's the introduction of the Gen 3. Let's talk Coyote real quick. All right, we got ourselves the traditional 5.0 Coyote motor. Now, if we go and start talking about the Coyote and where its history started, you can actually trace pretty much its entire lineage through the entire mod motor family. Unlike the LS and LQ, and even the Gen 3, which had a relatively fresh design, despite essentially being a new engine in 2011, it does share a lot of its core roots all the way back to the original mod motor, which started development in like 1980, and I think was first launched in the town cars in like 84. That's not to say this thing is out of date. Of all three of our main swap engines, the Coyote is the most complicated. Now, if you're not familiar with the Mustang history, the significance of the 5.0, all through the 80s, the Mustang Fox body to have came with a 5-liter V8, the 5.0. So much so that the term 5.0 in the sports car, muscle car world generally is referencing a Fox body Mustang. But once you went away from the Fox body, I don't remember all the S codes for the chassis, but I think 93, the mod motor was introduced into the Mustang. You lost your 5.0 and you went to a 4.6. It was cam over valve. What that means is your camshafts no longer live in the middle of the engine, in the engine block, they sit on top of the valve. It comes at a packaging premium because you now have moved all of that space up to your cylinder heads versus it being compact in the center of the engine. So going through the dark times of the 90s into the early 2000s, where your Mustangs had the 4.6s, the 5.4s, sometimes supercharged, the mod motor is not a terrible motor at all. They have some bad raps, not necessarily well-deserved, but we went into the 2000s. They launched the retro kind of styled Mustang along with the Challenger's return and the Camaro's retro design, but they still had a 4.6 in it. So 2011 came out where they got the 5-liter V8 back into them. And it's quickly proven to be a very capable engine. The Coyote puts out a lot of power out of relatively small displacement, but unfortunately it comes at a very large form factor because you now have 4 camshafts sitting on top of the cylinder heads. It sits at a relatively wide V, and it just takes up a lot of space in the engine bay, which you can kind of tell here, especially if we compare it to an LS or the Hemi in this exact same engine bay. Now, if you are shopping Coyotes, you can get them out of trucks, you can get them out of cars. One benefit of getting them out of the truck, one of the best swap manifolds available, you can buy from Ford Racing, it's a little under $300, are basically just the F-150 truck cast manifolds. Didn't work in my application here, but if you get it out of a truck, you're gonna have to run into other problems with accessories, some things like that. We're gonna get into that a little bit later. Mainly your biggest change came first in 2015, when they went to the Gen 2, which introduced slightly better valve timing control. And then they also added in a intake variable runner length control, which for most swap applications actually needs to get removed and deleted off the back of the intake manifold because it adds about 5 inches on the back of the intake manifold, which we didn't have any room for. So some of that gets blocked away. The other thing you really need to watch for if you plan to run some aftermarket controllers, 2018, they went to a direct injection fuel injector, where the injector is inside the combustion chamber. Really good for power and efficiency, but it creates problems when you're looking to tune and modify. All right, so now you know our players. We've got the LS, the Hemi, and the Coyote. And now it's time to kind of talk about what engine is gonna be right for you and the swap you're doing. Now, if I was witty, I would have some fun acronym for us right now, or it's, you know, all the points we're gonna talk about, I can just put up on the board here, but I don't have a witty acronym. We're just gonna talk about it. One of the biggest factors when it comes time to making an engine swap is what engine do you want? It may seem really silly, but sometimes you may have a brand loyalty. You have a Chevy and it's gotta have a Chevy engine. Mopar people, you dare not put anything other than a Mopar engine in a Mopar, let me tell you. But that's a big factor that you need to decide. Do you care what other people think? Do you want a particular engine performance? Do you want You know, the relative ease of the swap. Do you want something challenging? Do you want something with lots of off-the-shelf support? Do you mind having to fabricate and make some brackets? And that really is a big part of it as well. Parts availability. How easy can you get things to fix it, especially if you ever are road tripping your vehicle and you're broke down somewhere? Is it common enough that you can get parts? And for the most part, all three of these engines are very well supported through all of our parts houses. You can pretty much walk into any O'Reilly and get just about whatever you need for these engines. So that becomes a little bit smaller of a factor, but how easy is it to work on once it's in the car? That becomes a big factor of it, where the Coyote is, just being frank, kind of the hardest to do. And of course, there's factors like how does it sound, how much performance do you get out of it, and what is it gonna cost you? So maybe all those factors, Dwayne can, maybe they make some word here, the first letter of each one. I don't know, it'd just kind of be consonant gibberish, I think. But let's go through and talk about and kind of rank these engines for each of the factors. Now first, I guess we would talk about picking the engine you want. Well, I can't do that for you. That's decide what you really want. If you care about people being upset, that's up to you. So let's talk about ease of swapping these three engines. Technically, I will say the Hemi was easiest in my Duster because I have a QA1 front suspension kit and K-member set with bolt-in brackets and the American Powertrain bolt-in transmission kit for the transmission. So literally for me in this application, the Gen 3 Hemi bolted directly in, and the factory 6.1 manifolds did fit and clear all of my steering parts. So theoretically, technically, it was a bolt-in swap for me. Now, if you're fabricating from scratch, the LS and the Gen 3 Hemi really kind of land about the same in the sense that they're very easy to make motor mount brackets for. You're able to readily order motor mount plates if you want. The LS is cheaper, again, because there's so many of them, and both of them fit well with stock exhaust manifolds. Now, for the Coyote and its exhaust manifolds, because the cylinder heads are so wide, we are touching the passenger side strut tower. It is that wide. Exhaust became a big problem. I went ahead and purchased the Ford Racing swap manifolds, which are off the F-150, way too wide, couldn't use them. So while Ford Racing manifolds are affordable and an option, what we ended up going with were the Holley Flowtech Turbo Forward. They're meant to flip forward and run turbochargers, but we flipped them left to right and we're able to make them work, and they are an affordable option. But depending on your engine bay, the difficulty of getting exhaust manifolds in will be a thing that you're gonna have to work around. Also, when it comes to building and swapping things in, the belt drive on the Coyote is very difficult as well. We ran into that pretty substantially, whereas on the LS and on our Hemi, we had no real problem fitting everything we needed to in the engine bay. We did need to swap the power steering pump to a lower pressure power steering pump for the Hemi, but on the Coyote, alternator could not fit. It's a low mount alternator, wasn't an option. It is an electric power steering car, so if you want power steering, we ended up running a Toyota MRS electric steering pump so we could have our hydraulic power steering. And then Sean from Schwetty's Speed Shop built a reverse mount alternator for me. Also, another big key factor when you're looking at your swap and ease of swap are the availability of swap pans. The LS, there's 1,000,001 out there, and the Hemi has a lot of support. The Coyote is getting more support, but there is not as many of them out there just yet. So that is something that could be a difficult thing for you. You may have to make your own oil pan to fit your Coyote. So again, relative ease, the Coyote ranks last. It takes the most to fit into an engine bay and required the absolute most amount of custom fabrication. In my application, the Hemi, again, was easiest to bolt in, but really I'm gonna call it a tie between the Hemi and the LS for ease of swapping in. They both have tremendous amounts of aftermarket support, and while the LS is slightly smaller, the Hemi does not get so large that it becomes difficult to fit into an engine bay. So, 1 point each for these, I guess. So covering ease of swapping next, let's move on to price point. This could be a really big factor. Maybe you just want a good modern V8 as cheap as you possibly can. I will say on the computer side of things, all 3 engines we ran on a Holley Terminator X Max. The reason we had to run a Holley Terminator X Max was because the Coyote. It is the most complicated to run electronically, so we just got one Holley Terminator and we swapped between each engine, just the engine harnesses, and kept the same computer for all of them. That said, with a manual transmission, you can run both of the Gen 3 and the LS on a Holley Terminator. You can get your most basic entry kit just over $1,000 to run an LS on a Holley Terminator, or I think it's about $1,700 for the Gen 3 Hemi versus nearly $3,000 for the Coyote. So just on the computer side of things, you're running a lot there. Now, other things you can consider when doing a swap if you didn't want to go standalone. You can reflash factory computers, and most likely your motor set is going to come with the harness and everything you need. And that puts you in a position to where you can either repin and rewire your engine harness, or I know on the LS you can jump on the Jungle websites and get a imported wiring harness for less than like $160 that will plug into a stock LS computer. I know someone who's run them and have had good luck. It just scares the bejeebas out of me. Just the sheer number of connectors, like the ECU connectors, nearly what they're charging for the entire wiring harness. But then you can use a Diablo or HP tuners and flash the factory computer. I know a lot of junkyards, like the company we work with, J&J Auto Wrecking, you're able to buy the swap from them with the security already removed from the stock computer. So you would be able to potentially just buy that wiring harness, do your own wiring, and plug in, and technically not have an electronics cost. My biggest thing is I love the Holley Terminator for how incredibly simple it is to use. If you're not familiar with the Duster, I just ran all 3 Holley events racing each weekend, and the entire weekend I was racing on the base map. All I did was answer the questions on the handheld, the engines fired right up, and I raced all weekend long. So if we're gonna look at just the basic bare minimum cost of buying an engine and getting it running, not necessarily an LS. They're more expensive. An LS3, you're gonna be $5,000, $6,000, potentially $7,500, but you can get, I think what, at the 4.8 liters, you can do a lot of shopping and find the Iron Block Vortex for a couple $100s with an ECU. You can buy a rusted, rotted out Tahoe for $700 running and driving. That's engine, transmission, everything you need. And then you buy that harness and flash, so you're able to get everything LS based for pennies. Outright cheapest, you cannot beat the LS family. Our Gen 3 guys here, they get a little more affordable. You get them out of the trucks, you get them out of the cars. They range anywhere from $1,800 to $6,000 depending on what flavor you're going for. Unless we're talking about the Hellcat engines, which, you know, they're a lot more. Good Coyotes, you're $5,000 and up pretty much for a complete pull-out. Their electronics are the most expensive. Hands down, the Coyote right now is still the most expensive to swap. So 2 points, 1 point, 0 points, so LS is leading by 1. So yes, each engine can get very expensive, but you know what's not expensive? Free. And that's something that's really cool coming up. Our friends at J&J, who worked with us so much on this entire project, got all of these engines out to us. They're gonna be doing a giveaway on an LS engine. I don't know exactly which one yet. We're still getting all the information together, but it's gonna be an LS. And all you need to do is be subscribed to their YouTube channel, and they're gonna release more details soon. So head over to the J&J Auto Wrecking channel, keep an eye out, and as soon as I get more information, I'm gonna share it with you as well. But to celebrate TriHard and the Triple Crown, they're giving one of you guys an LS engine to put in your project. Another big factor is sound. We had the same exhaust on each of these engines in the same car, so we have a really good clip. Dwayne, let's just play, you know, just some of the exhaust notes of the LS, the Hemi, and the Coyote. Now, when it's selecting for sound, that is a very personal thing. I can't tell you what sounds best. You're gonna tell me something sounds different that sounds best. It's everyone's opinion. There's all kinds of phrases, turn of phrase of, you know, opinions are like different body parts. At any rate, to me, the Hemi sounds best. Really with just about any exhaust. The Hemi sounds fantastic. The LS comes in a really strong second. I feel like it's just, I'm gonna hate on the Coyote here. So 2, 1, and 0, we're kind of in a dead heat. All right, and then again, the last big thing, performance. Now, setting up this entire premise with this car, initially we were gonna have a pretty good, you know, platform. We were gonna have all the same racetracks, the same driver, to really compare how they did on time between autocross, drag racing, and all of that function. Unfortunately, I actually kind of went about trying to make the car better each weekend, so it wasn't a direct apples to apples comparison. The first weekend out in the autocross with the LS, we set some really good autocross times, some decent 3S times. Drag racing wasn't very good because we had spring wrap. The chassis wasn't working. So the following weekend, we made some improvements to the rear suspension with just some simple slapper bars, which helped the Hemi become really good at drag racing, but the extra weight on the nose of the car became extremely apparent. The other problem I was having is this Hemi makes so much more torque down low than both the LS and the Coyote that I just spun the tires. It was hard to accelerate out because all it wanted to do was spin the tires. And then for Ford Fest, I went ahead and did a whole 4-link in the rear suspension. We threw the leaf springs away. So it ended up making, on paper, the Coyote the best performing. It had the fastest drag ET, it had the best autocross, and the best 3S times. That said, if we went back, and I could tell honestly just by how the way the car drove the whole time, the LS would have been fastest. This LS3 in the front of the car, the difference in the weight between making the car push and its power delivery, the LS would have been the best performing of them all. What is really interesting is a way to generate and measure horsepower is your mile an hour in the quarter mile, and all three of them basically mile an hour identical, meaning they had very similar power delivery. Hemi had a lot of torque, the Coyote had tremendous high RPM horsepower, and the LS3 came in with really good mid-range to top end. What did that mean with these three engines on the autocross? Well, one thing I complained about in the Ford Fest video is the Coyote did not work well with the gearing I had in the car. It really needs to be wound up. At like 3,500 RPM and up, it's really happy. On the particular autocross course, you were under that a whole lot, but I didn't have a first gear or second gear. I needed like 1.5 gear for the Coyote to be happiest. So it favored the torque delivery that both the LS and the Hemi gave us. Now granted, both of these are bigger displacement engines, and bigger displacement will generate better torque delivery just by their nature. You're moving more air quicker. Now we're also gonna talk performance in a broad spectrum for you guys when it comes time to modify them. How easy is it to make a whole lot of horsepower out of them? And unfortunately, the LS is king because there's hundreds of millions of them. It is something you can go online and just click a couple buttons and get 300 horsepower packages delivered between heads and cams. Like, it is a known formula. The Gen 3 Hemi is getting there, and kind of the Gen 3, 300 horsepower button is the Elephants, the Red Eyes, the Superchargers. They go incredibly well with boost. They're great along that aspect, but when it comes to formula proven upgrades, you cannot beat the performance of an LS right now. The Coyote is doing amazing things. You watch what they're doing in drag racing. You can make a lot of horsepower out of a Coyote. Do not get me wrong. But horsepower per dollar, you cannot beat an LS right now. So I guess that's 3, 2. We'll give the Coyote 1 point. I don't want the Coyote to strike out on everything. Ultimately, I hope this, helps you pick a little bit. This is not meant to be the LS's best. I've got LS's in the International. I've got the LS in the drag car. It's just good bang for buck. So that may make you think, okay, the LS is gonna go back in the Duster, right? Nope, the Gen 3 is going back in it, and we're actually gonna put this LS in our International pickup truck, and the Coyote is gonna go back to J&J Auto Wrecking. It's just a matter of preference for me. Each engine has a time and place. I like the idea of the big 7-liter stroker in the Duster. It's a lot of fun to me. I am not each engine has to go in its family. It's working out that way for me, that I'm putting the Gen 3 in this. The Sport Satellite build, I'm doing a classic vintage Mopar big block build. We got LSs going in things. The Ford engines that we're doing and the Ford projects we have on the channel, I'm actually doing a Ford 300 build. It just, to me, the Coyote is a great engine. It's just not for me. It might be right for you. I hope this was helpful and you guys, determining and learning a little bit more about the 3 most popular engine swaps, what they can do, and hopefully it's going to help lead you to not make a questionable choice when it comes to your engine. You're able to have a little bit more knowledge, decide what is right for you, and go out there and get your car swapped, get it driving, and get it out on the road running and enjoyable. Because the only thing worse than a project car is a project car you're not working on. So I hope you guys enjoyed this little bit of insight. Hopefully you are understanding while I'm still in a little bit of surgery recovery and getting back to 100% where I can get this back in there. And we'll keep on going with some exciting stuff. We've got a lot of really cool things coming before the end of the year, and I can't wait to share it all with you. I'm Jared, reminding you guys to always make questionable choices, except for when it comes to spending a whole lot of money on your engines. Do a little bit of research. It's okay to make questionable choices, but don't make stupid ones. We'll see ya.